What is going on, Hive Warriors? So today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to focus on the past. In 1920, were they doing things that were so different to what we were doing, which is why their obesity rate was dramatically low, definitely in comparison to where it is now. There was essentially almost no morbid obese people, and there were very few overweight people back in the 1920s. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the data and find out why exactly is this the case? And is there something that we can learn from them that can assist us now in terms of losing weight or getting us to a much better obesity to non-obesity ratio? Now, if you look at this chart of 18-year-old American men, you can see an exponential explosion after 1909 into 1920s. Now, this is by birth. So pretty much basically those who were born in 1909 were young adults around the 1920s. However, you can see that those born in 1920 to 1939 had an explosion in their BMI and overall weight average. So that gap between 1909 and 1920 in terms of those being born within that time frame, that's huge. Why is that? Because that's what started the trend. Of course, it stayed somewhat stable from that time period, from the 1920s to the 1939 birth date into the 1950s. But if you can see, after the 1950s, there's a massive explosion going into the 1980s. But what started it all? Let's dive deeper into the average lifestyle of those born from the 1870s to the 1909s. They grew up without a lot of things that we take for granted. There were massive labor-reducing technological changes in the 20th century. Machines doing a lot of the heavy lifting in regards to actual labor. So many different office jobs were required to be able to man communication and these machines, as opposed to actual physical labor, which was a big important part, because the fitness genre, or just fitness overall, didn't really exist. People were consistently working. People were consistently doing heavy duty jobs that required a lot of their energy, which in turn basically gave them the physical activity needed to be consistent on a daily basis. There were also not many labor laws to protect you from overworking. So a lot of people were working for a long time, and even children were working back in 1909 up until the 1920s. The first ever drive-in restaurant, which was called White Castle, was founded in 1921, literally within the 1920s. So not only are more people having access to vehicles during this time, but more people are also going in and eating fast food, which is always highly processed even back then, so that they can make it as quickly as possible, but make it taste as good as possible. McDonald's started operations in 1940, Kentucky Fried Chicken in 1952, Burger King in 1954, and the list goes on and on. Taco Bell, 1962. So as we continue to move forward, we're continuing to increase foods that are easy to consume, easy to purchase, but highly processed, highly caloric foods. So just the culture of consumption had increased from 1909 all the way into the 1920s. And as we mentioned, because of the Ford Model T, a lot of people started having access to vehicles, even from the middle class and up, as opposed to just some people in the upper class and most people in the rich class. Radio and television broadcasting was brought to the world and brought to the United States. This also increased people just being more sedentary. Now you could just be at home and be entertained. You don't have to necessarily do anything outside of your home to create entertainment. Of course, there were, little things that people could do like board games and stuff like that. Those things had a shelf life. As with TV broadcasting, you could sit there and because of the novelty of it, because of how exciting it was and how addicting it was, they can sit there and just watch television for a long period of time, way longer than what they would do if they were playing a board game. And even when they were playing board games and different things like that, they were still at least active. It was non-exercise activity thermogenesis, but there was more movement. While with television, all you have to do is sit down and watch it. So what can we gather from this data? Simply put, we started moving way less and we started eating way more. That's all it is. There's nothing super groundbreaking about what they were doing specifically. It's just that before the 1920s, they just didn't have access to a lot of the things that we have access to. If we want to eat right now, it's no sweat off our backs. We could just get something to eat. We could just go to a fast food restaurant. We could do whatever and consume food. We could consume snacks. There weren't so many snacks back then. We could consume something really quickly. So snacking culture obviously went up, increasing obesity going into the 1980s and into the 1990s and the 2000s. And then more technology is being made that allows for us to do less things, right? So there are more things that are taking away from the physical workforce because technology is being more efficient at doing these things. Robotics, AI, things like that. And then that's taking away from the human having to do physical labor. But it pushes more work to be office work, sedentary work where you're sitting at a desk. Those are more in demand because those require a human brain to some extent. However, the physical labor stuff that's just cut and dry, a lot of robotics are able to do those jobs. So we continuously keep moving towards a space where we're moving less and we're eating more. We are a culture of consumption while being also sedentary at the same time. And that is a recipe for disaster. That is why we are where we are now. Can we combat that? Absolutely. All you have to do is ensure that you are exercising. You physically are taking the time off to exercise. That can combat the fact that you don't work a physically demanding job, right? That can combat the fact that even if you work a physically demanding job, labor laws prevent you from overworking. It's not that you want to work more, but that did provide a physical activity for long periods of time throughout the day and throughout the week. But now you can purposely go to the gym, purposely do cardio exercise to combat that notion that you don't have that where you're just automatically doing the things that you quote unquote should be doing to not be sedentary. And of course, controlling how much you eat and how much processed foods you eat so that you can ensure that you're not, one, getting addicted to the food, and two, that you are not overeating. And if you do that, then you can help control your overall weight. And if you gain weight, if you lose weight, obviously it's easier said than done because things that are happening to us as when we are children, it tends to create this psychological barrier that is hard to break out of because you become addicted to the lifestyle. You become addicted to overeating. You become addicted to food. The same way anybody could become addicted to cigarettes and addicted to drugs, you can also become addicted to food. So it is much easier said than done, which is why we should always celebrate anybody whenever they lose massive amounts of weight. Hopefully this video has helped you guys, giving you an insight. Seen a lot of people talking about things that people were doing in the past, and if we can implement it now, why were they not obese back then while we are now, and it's continuing to grow exponentially? It's because the hard intensive labor has been reduced over time with technology. We've become more sedentary and consumption has increased, or consumption culture has increased over time. So we're eating more, working less, obviously that is a recipe for disaster. Anyways, until the next time, guys, peace out.